Mr Woods-Joyce. Look, I appreciate that for TikTok and perhaps for Mr Hunter in particular, there might have been some anxiety about or apprehension about appearing before the committee today because I, among others, have been critical of the company. At the outset, I want to assure you that my criticism is not of you as individuals. Personally, I have questions about the conduct of the company which you work for, but I don't want that to come across as personal reflections in any way. I thought a good way to start might be to try and establish a shared agreement on basic facts about TikTok and your operations, and then we can kind of proceed to more substantive questions. So I'll just run through them. They're not designed to be exhaustive. There may be quick answers. If they're complex answers, that's fine, but let's try and get through them. So first of all, is TikTok a subsidiary of ByteDance?
It is indeed, Senator.
Is ByteDance a Chinese company?
Well, ByteDance is very much a global company. You could readily have a look on the ByteDance website to see the corporate structure of ByteDance. But most importantly for this committee, I think, is perhaps the ownership of that company. 60% of ByteDance is beneficially owned by global institutional investors, and many of those companies you'll likely be familiar with. So they include BlackRock, Carlyle Group, General Atlantic, and many others. The board of ByteDance is 60% American citizens. There are 5 members of that, and ByteDance's CEO is represented on that board.
I thought we'd get further in the second question before we had a disagreement on facts, but let's just try and unpick that briefly. You have previously said, including in your submission to this very committee and in filings in the US court system, that you are either a Chinese company or a Chinese headquartered company, or you have Chinese origins. Why are you no longer willing to say those facts that you yourself have shared previously and not only months ago?
Senator, I'm not saying that the founders aren't Chinese. That's true. ByteDance was established some 11 years ago by those Chinese entrepreneurs, and I'm happy to stand by that.
Okay, all right. So it is a Chinese-founded company. Is it headquartered in China?
Well, ByteDance has operations around the world. My understanding is there are more than 150,000 employees, and those employees are based out of 120 cities around the world.
Yes, but where is the headquarters? Every company has a headquarters.
Oh, Senator, there are offices in China. I don't know the formal headquarters of the company, but I'm very happy to provide that very specific piece of information, and I'll do so as soon as I can. My apologies.
Where do the majority of employees reside?
Again, I'm not 100% sure around the majority of ByteDance employees, but TikTok itself operates outside of mainland China, and we have tens of thousands of staff around the world.
Does ByteDance have an internal Chinese Communist Party committee?
I'm not aware of the structures that might be in around ByteDance. We are employees of TikTok. I'm not in a position to provide detailed information around the internal workings of the ByteDance Corporation, but I'm happy to provide.
Sorry to interrupt, but are you seriously not able to say how your parent company, which ultimately owns and controls you, is operated? I mean, this has been an issue which has been widely canvassed in the media. I'm sure it would not have escaped your attention. If you're not able to answer, perhaps Mr Hunter or Mr Farrell can answer.
As I'd said, ByteDance is our parent company, and as you've acknowledged, but ByteDance is organised in a way that is typical of many large global companies and typical of, indeed, internet companies that may be organised in similar fashions.
TikTok's internal talking points have previously been leaked to the media, and in those talking points it says to play down the connection with the Chinese Communist Party. Is that what you're seeking to do today?
No, Senator. As I mentioned before, we were founded 11 years ago by Chinese entrepreneurs. We do have a history and a heritage in China. We're not resiling from that. And as you'd likely be aware, we do also have staff in China. I expect we'll get to that at some point in time.
Your reluctance to acknowledge basic facts about the parent company with whom you are ultimately employed is not a promising start to your willingness to honestly answer these questions. It appears like obfuscation to me. Let's move on, though, because it is a clearly established fact that there's a CCP committee in ByteDance. Is Douyin commonly described as the sister app of TikTok, also a ByteDance subsidiary?
I'd just like to clarify, Senator, my intention, as indeed the intention of all of the witnesses here today, is to be honest and forthright with the committee. Wherever I can't answer a question, I will absolutely endeavour to come back to you as quickly as I possibly can. But sorry, Senator, what was the detail of your question?
Is Douyin commonly described as the sister app of TikTok, a ByteDance subsidiary?
TikTok is the product that's available outside of mainland China, and I have heard Douyin referred to in that fashion.
Is it a ByteDance subsidiary?
The corporate structure is on the ByteDance website. I'm very happy to skip back through myself and confirm how that ownership might flow through down from ByteDance, which is, of course, the parent company.
Okay, if you're not able to say, I can say it is. Does the Chinese government have a strategic stake in Douyin?
No, Senator. There is an arrangement with respect to a specific domestic entity, but just to be very clear, there have been some misunderstandings about a domestically held company in China. The company you're referring to is operating only in China, and there is no
Yes,
interaction.
I know that. That wasn't my question. My question is there a strategic stake on behalf of the Chinese government in Douyin? And the answer is?
Well, Senator, there's no ownership of the Chinese government or any other in ByteDance or TikTok, the parent company.
That wasn't my question. I asked you a very specific question. This is continued obfuscation from you, Ms Woods-Joyce, and it does not reflect well on the company that you're not willing to answer direct, simple questions directly. And I have grave concerns about the more substantive questions I'm going to get to if these factual questions can't be answered directly.
Well, Senator, as we mentioned on the website, there is a disclosed company that operates in China that is the domestically held company, and there is a 1% ownership stake in that specific company.
It would have been better if you'd have able to say that in the first response that you gave. Thank you. Does the Chinese government have a representative on the board of Douyin?
I'm not sure of the board representation, but I am happy to follow up for you, Senator.
If you could take that on notice, that'd be good, but the answer is yes. Do ByteDance employees in China sometimes work on both TikTok and Douyin apps?
We've been quite clear that we do have a global workforce. We are a global company with operations around the world. There are engineers around the world, including in Australia, including in the US, and also in China, and those teams will work to support the TikTok product. Yes.
Yes, so they do both work on both of the apps. Thank you. How many engineers does TikTok employ who work on the app in China?
I don't have the precise figures, I'm afraid, Senator. I'll be happy to see if I can get that on notice for you.
Okay. Do those employees have access to the data of users as part of their work?
Senator, I'm pleased that you asked that question because, as you know, joining us here is Mr Farrell. Mr Farrell is responsible for our data, many of our data security practices, and is able to provide you with a lot of information around how we manage the user data.
I don't need a lot of information in this instance, Ms Woods-Joyce. We may get to that, but I just need a simple answer to this simple question, which is, do the engineers of TikTok working from China have access to the data of users, yes or no?
Under strict circumstances and to the processes that Mr Farrell can speak to, there is provision for very strict access on some circumstances to user data. Mr Farrell, if you might perhaps like to describe
I'll come to Mr Farrell in a minute. I don't need the detail. I just wanted that substantive question answered, which you have. They do. Can they make changes to the algorithm of TikTok?
Senator, it's not quite as simple as a yes-no answer in this environment. Mr Farrell is here to provide detail to the committee.
And if I have questions for him, I'll come to him, Ms Woods-Joyce. My question is, can the China-based employees who work on the TikTok app make changes to the algorithm?
Again, there is a range of practices that we put in place to keep all aspects of our app and its operations safe and secure, including the recommendation system that you're referring to. And I would like it if Mr Farrell was able to answer how that might look in practice.
Mr Farrell, if you could just answer directly, please. Can they make changes to the algorithm, the China-based employees of TikTok?
They can make changes that will then go under a security review to make sure those changes are acceptable.
Thank you. Are the employees of TikTok in China subject to the national security laws of China, including the National Intelligence Law of 2017?
Well, Senator, as I'd like to describe very briefly, TikTok is not available in China.
I know that. We've already established that, Ms Woods-Joyce. You do not need to repeat that talking point. I'm asking a question which follows directly from the previous one. You agreed there are TikTok employees based in China who work on the app. I'm asking, are those employees subject to the national security laws of China, yes or no?
Well, Senator, as I understand it, the Chinese law applies no more and no less to any business that may have operations and staff in China.
Great.
That includes many Australian major banks and telcos and others that have operations.
Thank you. My question's not about the banks. My question is about TikTok. You've answered yes, they are subject to those laws. What would the lawful basis be for TikTok to refuse access to Australian user data if it was required under that law?
Just like to be very clear, Senator, I don't agree with your characterisation of the practice there. We have clearly stated on a number of occasions that we have never been asked for that user data, and we would not provide it if we were asked.
Yes, and we'll come to that. But what would be the legal basis for refusing to cooperate with Chinese intelligence agencies or the Chinese government if your employees, who you've acknowledged are subject to this law, were subject to a request under the Act? How would you refuse it?
Senator, I've not acknowledged that, but what I would say is that the data is not stored in China. It is stored in Singapore.
That's not relevant. Ms Woods-Joyce, I'm not asked you a single question about the storage of data. We may come to that if we have time. We've already established that these employees have access to user data. You've agreed to that. We've also agreed that they're subject to these laws. If a request was made under those laws for access to that data, what would be the basis for those employees or the company to refuse that access?
Well, Senator, we have never been asked, and as we've repeatedly stated, including our CEO in his most recent congressional evidence, we would not provide that user data if we were asked.
So your evidence is you would break Chinese law?
Well, Senator, I just can reiterate the very clear statements that have been made across our business by senior leaders, and that is we've never been asked for the user data, and we would not provide it if we were asked.
Yeah, you say you've never been asked. How would you know if you had been asked? And in particular, how would you know if an individual employee had been asked, given that that National Intelligence Law of 2017 has confidentiality requirements that are imposed on individuals who are assisting the work of intelligence agencies?
Firstly, what I would say is that we have very rigorous protections and policies in place to keep that user data safe and secure and to keep it within our business. I would also just say that just as you've characterised the advice with respect to our business, so it would also be true of any
Yes, but I'm not asking questions about other businesses, Ms Woods-Joyce. I'm just asking questions about TikTok, and you can't speak to the operations of other companies. You can only speak to your own company. And what I'm asking is, if an employee, let's say an engineer working on the TikTok app who has access to Australian user data, as you've agreed, was, as you've agreed, subject to this law, approached by an intelligence agency and asked to provide it and was compelled to be silent about it, how on earth would you or anyone else in TikTok Australia know about it?
Well, Senator, I think, again, if you allow me to refer to my colleague, Mr Farrell does have the detailed working understanding of how data is protected, kept and logged in our company.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. Again, Will Farrell. I came on TikTok about 3 years ago as the global head of cyber native defense. We have a number of protections in place. So the first piece is something that's common across many technology and financial institution industries where there's a security principle called least privilege. So employees only get the minimum amount of access required to do their job, and it requires multiple approvals before they get that access. So they have to provide a business justification. For the sensitive data, it has to be approved by their manager. It has to be approved by the database owner. And if it's a cross-border access, meaning that it's a request from an employee in one country accessing user data of another country, it also has to go, that justification has to go through an additional review by the global security team based in the United States. Then there's additional protections for the most sensitive data, things like email address and phone number. Those are also encrypted. So even if someone was to get access to a database, they wouldn't be able to decrypt that information without the encryption key. So it would just appear to be gibberish. So employees can't get access without a clear justification, those approvals. Additionally, we also have a data access monitoring team, again, that part of that global security team based in the US, that monitors all data and access and looks for any kind of unusual or unauthorized access.
So are you able to disclose how often Australian user data has been accessed by employees in China then?
So as you know, there's millions of Australian users on the platform interacting with the platform every day, and we offer 24/7 support. Again, all of those access go through that principle of least privilege and requires robust approvals.
Yes, but you said it's logged, so presumably you're able to tell me then how often Australian user data has been accessed by mainland China employees.
Again, it's something that would happen based on the use case.
That's not my question, Mr Farrell. You can't on the one hand say we've got these really robust processes and we track and log everything and then also not be able to tell me how often it's been accessed. They both can't be true. Either you can't tell me because you don't know, or you do know and you're refusing to tell me. How often has Australian user data been accessed by mainland China employees?
I don't have specific numbers in front of me. I'd be happy to take that on notice.
I'd be grateful if you could take that on notice. You've just described very robust, apparently robust policies and procedures to stop illegitimate access to user data. How then was it the case that TikTok inappropriately spied on journalists and attempted to identify their sources through the app?
Senator,
I can take this question. And first, I would dispute the characterisation that we spied on journalists. To go into some detail around what happened there, this has been well canvassed in the media. I'm happy to go through it in detail again. And after I've explained a little bit of detail, I'll defer to Mr Farrell for some of the data protections we have in place to ensure this can't happen again. Firstly, what you speak about is serious misconduct by rogue employees. This is not what the company stands for. These employees were seeking to isolate the source of leaked confidential company information. They were unsuccessful in that effort, but we're aware that with this serious misconduct from these rogue employees, serious changes need to happen in the business. The first that I'd go through is that those employees are no longer with the business. The second is that we engage the services of a highly reputable legal entity to look through our business to understand where our processes and procedures need to be strengthened. And the third is that we double down on those data security efforts to make sure that this can't happen again. And very clearly, I want to reassure Australians, and in particular Australian journalists, that their safety and security on our platform is our #1 priority. Perhaps Mr Farrell can speak to some detail around doubling down.
Yeah, thank you. Before he does, I have some follow-up questions for you, Mr Hunter, because, of course, as you might remember, you publicly denied that this had even occurred in an op-ed in the Daily Telegraph on the 24th of October 2022. In fact, you said it wasn't even possible for this to happen based on the design of the app. Why did you mislead the Australian public in that op-ed?
Senator, I, along with the business, stand by the sentiments that we expressed in that op-ed in October. We are extremely focused on the safety and security of all of our users, some 1 billion plus globally and more than 8.5 million in Australia, including 350,000 businesses and many journalists. Their safety and security is our #1 priority. And of course, once it emerged after our op-ed that this serious misconduct by those rogue employees had taken place, of course, like many people, I was extremely disappointed in those actions, but heartened by the efforts that have taken place since to strengthen our security protocols and our policies within our business to ensure that that can't happen again, and that safety and security.
Sure, Mr Hunter, but you say you stand by it, but in that op-ed you denied that this had happened. You said it hadn't happened, and you also said it couldn't happen because of the nature of the data that was or wasn't collected by the app. That was wrong. Have you ever sought to publicly correct the record about those false claims that you made?
Senator, again, I stand by the sentiments that were expressed in that op-ed, and I would not categorise the efforts as spying. In Australia, we do not even track GPS data. There are a number of issues.
Well, we'll come to that as well. But you have, in that op-ed, you denied that this had happened. How can you stand by that? That was wrong, wasn't it?
Senator, the op-ed came out in October, and the Forbes article you mentioned came out in December. So
indeed, and so we had one allegation that was already in the media, which you were denying, which was non-specific in nature, that Emily Baker-White from Forbes wrote, saying that individuals in the US had been tracked. You denied that that had happened. You said it wasn't technically possible, and then in December, your company admitted that in fact it had happened, that it was possible, and that people had been fired from your company as a result. You've made a false claim on the public record about your own app. Why should we rely on anything you say to the committee today when we can't rely on what you previously said?
Senator, again, this has been well canvassed in the media, and a number of our senior executives have spoken about this at detail, including our CEO in the recent congressional hearing. That safety and security of our users is our #1 priority, and unfortunately, with those rogue employees, this is an element of what is called insider risk. I'd like to defer to my colleague, Mr Farrell, to talk about the nature of insider risk and the protections we have in place to make sure that this can't happen again.
Thank you, Mr Hunter, but you don't direct questions to your colleagues. It's the job of the committee members to ask questions to you. If I'm interested in that, I'll ask Mr Farrell about it. A more specific question for you. You're the General Manager of Operations for Australia. Are you responsible for employing everyone who works for the Australian subsidiary of TikTok?
No, Senator, I'm not.
Well, who is then?
Senator, like many other businesses, including businesses I previously worked at, we operate in a matrixed environment with many different business departments. I'm not responsible with the direct reporting line for all of those employees in Australia.
So who is responsible?
Many different business departments. I might defer to my colleague, Ms Woods-Joyce, to talk about how her reporting lines are different to mine.
I'm not interested in that, thank you. So has it ever been the case that people have turned up to work at TikTok Australia who you didn't know was working for the company, who you hadn't hired?
Yes, we have a large business in Australia. Ms Woods-Joyce mentioned that we have more than 250 people. There are different business departments that don't report through to me that are employed by other business lines. For example, our legal team may have different reporting lines. Our public policy team has different reporting lines. So that's not unusual. That's very similar. I've worked for Google for 10 years. That's entirely similar to how Google would operate.
You portrayed yourself in the media to be the responsible entity in Australia who governs TikTok, and you've made assurances to the Australian people about how their data is safe and how the app operates. If you're not even in charge of who comes and works for you, how can you possibly provide those assurances?
To be clear, Senator, I am one of several spokespeople for TikTok in Australia, and I rely on the expertise of many of my counterparts, including Ms Woods-Joyce and Mr Farrell, to ensure that any public statements I make reflect the variety of different perspectives and expertise within the business.
Even when they're false, like in relation to spying on journalists in the United States?
Again, Senator, I would not categorise what has happened there as spying.
Okay. You mentioned the issue of GPS location. Is it the case, or is it not the case, that TikTok in Australia collects the GPS location of its users?
If I might, Senator, we do not collect GPS of our users in Australia.
Why does your privacy statement say that you do?
With the TikTok Australia, we do not collect it in Australia, nor do we collect it in the US.
Why does your privacy policy say that you do?
The rest of the world privacy policy, Australia's privacy policy sits in there. They may collect it in other markets, but we don't collect it in Australia.
To be really clear, are you drawing a distinction between precise GPS location information or all GPS information location?
Senator, what we will collect is an approximate location based on an IP address. We don't have GPS available for collection in Australia.
Okay. Internet 2.0 has done analysis that identified the Android application queries the device GPS location at least once an hour per running. Is that true or untrue?
Senator, the reports that have been produced by Internet 2.0 do contain a range of information that is not necessarily accurate. The researchers themselves have acknowledged that they did not have the correct testing environment, but nevertheless, Mr Farrell is our data expert. I'd be very happy to defer to him on the detail here.
Yes, as Ms. Woods-Joyce spoke, we do not collect GPS in Australia, and so that was an inaccuracy in the Internet 2.0 reporting.
Okay. I do need to share the call with my colleagues. I might offer the call to Deputy Chair Senator Walsh, and then I'll come back with further questions. Thank you. Returning to a couple more topics, TikTok has been accused by many people of engaging in censorship and facilitating propaganda. I want to put a couple of propositions to you about that and get your response to it. In August last year, Forbes reported that there were 300 current employees at TikTok and ByteDance who previously worked for Chinese state media publications like the Xinjiang News Agency and CGTN, and that there were 15 who were concurrently employed by those organisations and either ByteDance or TikTok. That seems like a very close relationship between the Chinese Party state and its propaganda arms and a tech company. What's the reason for that?
Senator, I don't know that I'd agree with your characterisation of the relationship there, but I can say very clearly...
Which part do you disagree with?
Well, in terms of the closeness of the relationship that you referred to. But TikTok does not moderate content based on any political sensitivity. None of our content is moderated in mainland China. Our moderation teams, just as TikTok does, operates outside of mainland China. So, I'm very happy to speak to a particular example if you have one, or provide general advice where it's helpful.
Mindful of the statement I made at the start about the consequences of misleading the Senate, you want to be really clear about that answer you gave. TikTok has never moderated content for political reasons?
Well, Senator, I didn't specifically say that, no. I would say that we have a platform with more than 1 billion users on it. It is a user-generated video-first platform. So at a company with the scale that we have 40,000 moderators around the world that work to make sure the content on our platform is safe and it's secure, that it is also consistent with the guidelines that we set. We always make sure that we try to moderate our content with technology and people.
Sorry, Ms Joyce, Ms Woods-Joyce, you did say that TikTok does not moderate content according to its political nature. Do you stand by that answer?
I do. TikTok's not moderated based on political sensitivity, Senator.
Has TikTok ever done so?
Well, I think we have acknowledged in the past that we have not always made the correct moderation decisions. And as I described, we have a very large platform with a lot of users.
Okay.
It's very hard to keep it safe, but we do not always get it right.
So you do acknowledge that TikTok has in the past censored content according to political sensitivities?
I understand that we have not. We have acknowledged that some of our earlier moderation practices were not always correct, but I can speak to the moderation practices of today.
Well, why did you make such a clear and unambiguous statement in response to my first question by saying that TikTok does not censor content in relation to political sensitivities that you're now having to walk back?
No, Senator, that's our contemporary practice. We don't moderate our content on any political sensitivity. We don't operate in mainland China.
Ms Woods-Joyce, that may well be true today, although I'm not sure I'd be willing to accept your assurances based on your previous answers. But it's pretty misleading to only talk about today and the future when in the past TikTok has been found to have done this. I mean, there was a report in The Guardian on the 25th of September 2019 that had your moderation documents themselves obtained, which related to sensitive materials including Tiananmen Square, Tibetan independence and the Falun Gong. TikTok has moderated that content in the past because of its political sensitivities, hasn't it?
Well, as I said, we haven't. We did acknowledge that we haven't always moderated in a way that reflects our current practices. We don't moderate currently on political sensitivity. And just to be very clear, all the content on our platform must adhere to the community guidelines. Where we find content that does not adhere, we will remove it. But it's not based on political imperatives or sensitivities.
It just was previously.
Senator, I was not in the business in the period I think you're referring to.
Sorry, Ms Woods-Joyce, if you are here today to represent the company, it is not just at this point in time. You are a representative of the company and I have questions about its conduct in the past. You cannot just exclude its conduct in the past because you weren't there. If you're not able to answer that, please refer it to one of your colleagues.
No, Senator. What I said was that we've acknowledged that we have made mistakes previously. But
yes, and you're sticking to that line, very religiously. But what does that mean? What does the mistakes mean? Was it a mistake to censor that content that was sensitive in political nature?
Well, Senator, if you would care to look on our platform, you will absolutely find content on any issue with a variety of views in and around it. We don't censor or promote content based on any political sensitivity. Except that you have previously. I mean, you keep saying we don't, but you have previously. Let's turn to another matter. In August 2020, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute reported that of 444 publicly visible videos on TikTok using the hashtag Xinjiang, only 5.6% were critical of the Chinese Communist Party's policies in the region. That was repeated in March 2021 and similar results were shown. Do you think that's representative of the true evidence of what's happening in Xinjiang? Well, Senator, you can find any type of content on our app so long as it adheres to the community guidelines. I can only reiterate what I said previously, and that is that we don't moderate based on political sensitivity. We report very openly and transparency the type of content that we do remove and the categories for which it's removed. So it's just a coincidence then that 95% of the content about Xinjiang on TikTok is positive, when bodies like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and the United Nations and many governments around the world have said there's either crimes against humanity, genocide, or other serious human rights abuses happening. 95% of the content is positive. Does that sound natural to you? Well, I'd suggest searching our app, Senator, because there is all types of content on our app. That content canvasses a range of views on a range of sensitive issues. Just not on Xinjiang, because it's overwhelmingly positive about Xinjiang, despite the overwhelming evidence about the human rights abuses taking place there. I encourage you to have a look at our app, Senator. Ms Woods-Joyce, let me ask you your opinion. Do you think there is human rights abuses occurring in Xinjiang? I understand from what I've read that there are some very serious issues facing those people, including some potential human rights violations, Senator, yes.
Okay. Moving back to this issue of surveillance on the platform, as you've acknowledged, the platform was misused to surveil journalists who were writing critical articles about the company. That's just one instance of surveillance identified on the platform. Some of your former employees, including in court filings, have also said that you used the application to spy on users in Hong Kong. Is that true?
Senator, I believe you might be referring to a lawsuit in the US at the moment. If it's the
yes, by Roger Yu, yes.
That's right. Look, just be sensitive to the fact that it is a matter before the courts, but I would say very clearly that we will be contesting the range of allegations that have been made in that matter, and we'll be defending the company strongly.
So the app has never been used to monitor Hong Kong protesters?
Senator, as I said, we've contested the allegations made in that matter, and we will be doing so in the legal environment that it's been brought.
That doesn't really answer my question, though. Have any users in Hong Kong have been surveilled on the platform?
Senator, my understanding is that TikTok is not available in Hong Kong.
I don't know whether it is today, but it certainly was historically.
As I said, I don't have the precise detail of the legal matter before me, but I can tell you that we are contesting the claims that have been made in that, and I imagine that will happen through the court process as well.
Okay. Australia has joined many other governments around the world, including the United States, Canada, France, the United Kingdom, the European Commission, New Zealand and others, in banning the download of your application on government-issued devices. That was based on security advice. Your company's been very critical of that ban. Is it still your evidence today that that ban is wrong?
Senator, we don't believe there's any evidence to support that TikTok is in any way a national security threat, as might be implied through some of the commentary about us. We have worked very closely with the previous government and indeed this government, where they would like to speak to us around our app, what it does, how we work very hard to keep our app safe and secure. And indeed, as you know, Mr Farrell is here to provide information on that. So we don't believe there's an evidentiary basis for the ban, but we are very open to government to speak to them about what we do, how we do it, and how we're continuing to invest to keep our app and our users safe.
So the Australian government is wrong, the United States government is wrong, the Canadian government is wrong, the French government is wrong, the Danish government is wrong, the European Commission is wrong, the New Zealand government is wrong, the United Kingdom government is wrong. They're all wrong on this question?
Well, Senator, as I said, we're very available and happy to speak to governments about our policies.
Well, you're speaking to a parliamentary committee right now. I'm sure governments will be reviewing the evidence. Are they wrong?
Senator, Mr Farrell is the data expert. He's here to speak to any specific questions you have. But
well, Mr Farrell, are they wrong?
There is no evidence to support that.
Thanks, Ms Woods-Joyce. Mr Farrell, are they wrong?
I've been working closely with the US government for the past 3 years for our solution in the US. We've never pushed back on the concerns. We're just implementing the requirements that the regulators have come up with, and it's been an ongoing discussion for several years. And we're just moving forward with the additional data handling requirements that they're requiring.
Sorry, Mr Farrell, your answer just then is very inconsistent with Ms Woods-Joyce's answer just before. You're not pushing back, so you accept the rationale of the ban?
I didn't say that. I said we choose not to argue about the concerns. We're just choosing to implement. We're working with regulators in every region to identify what the rules are that they want us to play by, and then we're just implementing those rules. So in the US...
Well, Mr Farrell, you're an expert... Sorry, Mr Farrell, you might be an expert on what's happening in the United States, but the company has absolutely pushed back here in Australia very robustly and argued against the ban, both before it happened and after it happened. I'm struggling to reconcile your evidence with the practice in Australia and the evidence of Ms Woods-Joyce just before. Do you contest the decision to ban it from government devices or not?
I shouldn't weigh in on political decisions. I'm here from a technical security standpoint.
Mr Farrell, Ms Woods-Joyce literally just handballed this question to you. She just referred it to you and said you could answer it.
What I said, Senator, was that Mr Farrell is our data security expert. If you have specific, of course, questions about our policies and practices that support our position, then he'd be very happy to provide that for you.
Well, it doesn't seem able to. If any of the three of you could provide an answer to this question, do you accept the decision by the Australian and other governments around the world to ban the app from devices or not? Do you contest it or not?
What we've said is that we don't believe there's an evidence to support claims that TikTok is a national security risk, and we're open to collaborations and discussions with government around our policies and our practices. Of course, it is the prerogative of governments to make decisions for themselves, for their employees, for their devices. That's not the point of contest here.
No, I don't think anyone's questioned the right of governments to do it, but you have questioned the wisdom of governments doing so, and Mr Farrell doesn't appear to disagree with it. Unless I'm misrepresenting you, Mr Farrell, please correct me.
Again, I'm not weighing in on political decisions. I'm just saying we're working with every regulator to tailor a solution for that environment, including working with the Australian government.
Okay. Sticking with you, Mr Farrell, why is it necessary for the application to collect so much information on its users? For example, why does it repeatedly ask to access the contact book of a device?
So the app doesn't collect any more information than necessary. So for the contacts, the user has the choice to opt in if they want to find friends from other platforms. So if they want to connect with other users, they have the choice to do so, but yes, they can decline.
Most apps have that feature, but even after you decline, users are persistently asked again to allow access. Why is that the case?
I can't talk to the frequency piece. It's something that users have the choice to approve or decline, and if they decline, we do not collect it.
Yes, but you repeatedly ask for it, and I think you would know that if you repeatedly ask a user for something, eventually they might get sick of clicking no every time and just click yes, so they don't have to keep answering the question again on a repeated basis. You have been brought to this committee at the request of your colleagues as to be an expert on this. Why are you asking so frequently for the contact lists of your users?
I would have to get back to you on the frequency. I do not know the frequency at which we request it, but we
Mr. Farrell, seriously? Are you seriously unable to answer that question? You don't know why?
Again, no, go ahead, Ella.
I was just going to say, I think, Senator, you might be referring to, again, the Internet 2.0 reports. And as Mr Farrell has described, and as I've spoken to as well, there are some inaccuracies in those reports, which we would be happy to speak to. And, as Mr Farrell has also said, he's a data security expert. He may not be expert in, the...
Okay, well then, to either you, Ms Woods-Joyce, or to Mr Hunter, why does the app so frequently ask to access the contact books of its users?
Again, I think we'd reflect on the Internet 2.0 reports in general terms.
It's not just Internet 2.0 who's made this point. Many other people have made this point. Why does TikTok so frequently ask for the contact book of its users?
Senator, I think it's interesting to understand what you mean by frequent. Mr Farrell has also said he's happy to provide information potentially on the frequency, and as indeed I would be after the fact. But what we do is industry standard. We collect no more or no less in many instances than many of the apps that you might be familiar with. And the reason why we will collect that information, and much of it is voluntary, including things like contacts, but we collect data for some very important reasons. And one of those is to ensure that the app is working as it's intended, that our users have a good experience on our app, and they also have the ability to turn off particular features and functions, including their privacy settings. The other reason why we collect app data from our users is to keep the app safe and secure and functioning as it's intended. But again, it's industry standard, and in fact, not more than any of our peers.
Yeah, well, I don't think there are any other apps that persistently ask for contact books as yours does, but let's move on to some other collection features. Why is it necessary for the app to map other applications that are installed on someone's device?
Senator, are you referring to the Internet 2.0 reports and the findings within them?
Ms Woods-Joyce, I'm referring to multiple public reports about TikTok, media coverage about your application. Why is it necessary to collect the information about other apps installed on a user's phone?
Senator, I'm not necessarily aware that we do that. Mr Farrell, are you able to speak to that?
To my knowledge, we don't do that, but I will get back and verify.
Okay, I'm surprised that you're not able to answer these sorts of questions that are kind of pretty obvious and foreseeable questions. Let's move on. Why is it necessary for the app to collect the Wi-Fi networks that a user logs into?
So to connect to Wi-Fi, as if the app is connected to Wi-Fi, it would use the Wi-Fi.
It's the device that connects to Wi-Fi, not the app. Why does the app need to know which Wi-Fi networks you've logged into?
So from a CIB standpoint, We do see to whether users are connecting and performance reasons, whether they're connecting through Wi-Fi or cellular, to see if we have performance issues when it's connecting to one or the other, if that's what you're referring to.
But why would it need to store the Wi-Fi networks that you collect, that it connects to, sorry?
Again, I'll have to, my knowledge is we collect whether or not the device is using Wi-Fi or cellular for performance reasons or security reasons to make sure it's an authentic device. But we're not mapping Wi-Fi networks, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. Why is it necessary to have the ability to store the keystrokes of users?
Senator, we don't store keystroke. We might observe particular behaviours for security reasons, but we absolutely don't log and retain the types of keystrokes that users might be putting in. It's a relatively common practice, as I understand it, and would speak to security risks around spam and other things that might occur on platforms.
What's the difference between collect and observe?
So logging would, keystroke logging would be the big indicator there as to whether something is retained in terms of the information that's being put in. Detection is, of course, just a high-level behavioural characteristic that might help identify spam and bots. But Mr. Farrell, if I've got that incorrect, please tell me.
No, you got that pretty good. So we will not detect that you're typing, like if you're typing the letters ABCD, we won't collect and store ABCD. What we'll do is measure the time between patterns of keystrokes to see if it's potentially a bot or a human user. The other thing we'll do is look for shortcuts, like on a keyboard you would do Control-V for paste, because one spammy behavior is that a spam, they might paste the same link or the same comments over and over again. So we would look for that behavior, but not the actual keystrokes that are pressed when a user is using it.
Okay. Moving on, I've only got two final matters. I realise we're at time. I'd be grateful for your agreement that we could just go over by 5 or 10 minutes to conclude these final two matters.
Sure.
Thank you. On the question of storage, the company repeatedly seeks to reassure users that because the data that is collected on them is stored in either the United States or Singapore, depending on your location, that provides a level of comfort and security. Why should we take comfort from the location of the storage if the data can be accessed from elsewhere in the world, including mainland China?
Senator, I would also add that we do store data in Malaysia as well, just to make sure that we're being fulsome with the committee. So we do have 3 locations. I think that the location of data storage is something that is often spoken about in the industry. I think Singapore and Malaysia and indeed the United States are regular storage locations for companies of the scale and operation of ours. Mr. Farrell, I'm not sure if I've missed something that's important in your world as well.
Sure. I mean, physical access is important as well. So physical locations on servers and the sort is also important to make sure that those are physically protected and locked down.
But why should we take any comfort whether it's stored in Australia or Antarctica if it can be accessed by the employees in mainland China? What's relevant about the storage location if the access is uninhibited?
Well, Senator, sorry, Mr. Farrell.
And the access isn't uninhibited, right? As I mentioned earlier, we apply a principle of least privilege, and so you only get access to the minimum amount of data to do your job, and then there's additional protections, as I mentioned earlier, around encryption of sensitive fields and the like. So it is not uninhibited access. And then the physical location does matter. As a security expert, you want to make sure your data centers have security. You want to make sure where those data centers are have to comply with local law. And so certainly the physical site does matter.
Okay.
Which is why, as you can see in several regions, we're implementing specific measures that those regulators have asked for.
Okay. Just finally, TikTok commissioned a report from an academic, Mr. Nigel Fair, in relation to your application. How much was Mr. Fair paid for that report?
Thank you for the question. And we did commission Professor Fair, who is an independent expert and some renowned in Australia with respect to cybersecurity, but that agreement with Mr. Fair is understandably commercial in confidence, and I'm not able to disclose the amount we've transacted.
Commercial in confidence is not a valid reason for refusing to answer a question to a Senate committee. You are obliged to answer the question unless you have a valid reason why it can't be answered, and commercial in confidence is not an accepted grounds for the Senate.
Well, Senator, I don't have the precise detail in front of me. I am happy to go back on notice and provide that information wherever I'm able to.
Well, I'm sure Mr Hunter, as the Director of Operations from Australia, would know how much money was spent on that report. Mr Hunter, how much was it?
I'm not aware of that figure either, Senator.
Really? So the head of public policy and the head of operations don't know how much money you spent on a report, which has been a contentious issue debated in the media. Seriously.
Senator, we have a range of transactions we would do in any one day, as you would appreciate, of a business of our size and scale. As I've said, I'm very happy to see what information I can provide back to the committee on notice.
Did you provide Mr Fair with a terms of reference for this independent report?
Mr Fair and Professor Fair, we had engagements with him to talk about the scope of works that might be, a part of the arrangement with Mr Fair, but Professor Fair is indeed an eminent expert. He's independent. The commissioning of reports like this is quite common, and indeed Professor Fair has strongly stood by the findings of his report.
The scope then of the report, was that documented in writing?
I believe so. I'd be happy to check the details of the contractual arrangement with Professor Fair, and as I mentioned with respect to payment, I'd be happy to see what we can provide on notice to the committee.
I'd be grateful.
It absolutely was an independent report, and Professor Fair stands by his findings.
Yeah, I'd be grateful if you could provide on notice the scope of works or, if necessary, the contract. I'll accept if you need to redact personally identifying information. We don't need Mr Fair's address or anything private like that, but the scope of the works is of interest to the committee, and I'd ask that you provide that on notice. Are you aware that Mr Fair has commenced legal proceedings in the form of a defamation concerns notice against a number of individuals who commented on his report?
Those are matters for Professor Fair. I can't speak to anything that he may be doing. He's, as I said, independent. I'm not aware of the work that he does outside of the arrangement that we had for commissioning the report that he produced.
So you haven't discussed with him any possible legal action, and you're not supporting or financing any of that legal action?
Senator, I've not discussed that with Professor Fair. No, I mean, those are matters for him.
I'm not just asking you personally, Ms Woods-Joyce. All of TikTok, including Mr Hunter, have you discussed legal action that Mr Fair may be taking or intending to take?
I have not, Senator.
Has anyone else at TikTok? Do you have a general counsel who might have discussed it with him?
I'm not aware of discussions that might have happened with Professor Fair of that nature, Senator.
Could you take that on notice, please, on behalf of all TikTok Australia employees? Did you engage a public relations firm to promote Mr Fair's report?
TikTok has a range of consultants that we might use to support the business and the operations, including we do have a PR agency as well. I'm not sure what specific arrangements might have been in place, but I understand that the website, our TikTok website, hosts links to the report.
I'm not asking about links on your website. I'm asking, did you engage a public relations firm to promote the report?
We do have a communications consultant that we would use for things like that. I don't have the full details in front of me. I'm happy to see if there was an
Perhaps Mr Hunter can assist. Do you have any information about that, Mr Hunter?
Senator, we have an internal PR and comms team that works across the business. And in addition, we engage the services of agencies in a PR capacity for all manner of different activities. I'm not aware of any specific agency engagement with regards to that. I think it would just be the responsibility of our generalised PR capability.
Well, I'd be grateful again if you could take that on notice and provide further information, because it seems to me that a report paid for by TikTok, the scope of which was negotiated with TikTok, which was promoted by a PR firm on behalf of TikTok, hardly meets the definition of independent. It seems lacking in independence completely.
Senator, Professor Fair is a respected cyber expert. He stands by his report, but we are happy, as we mentioned, to provide answers to your questions on notice wherever we can.
Thank you. I'll look forward to the answers to those and other questions on notice. I'd be very grateful if you could provide it to the committee by Friday, noting that we have a short time frame for which the committee can report. I thank the TikTok representatives very much for joining the committee today.